Rick Green, welcome to 20 Minutes Around Your Town.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Rick, you're from Pepperell, where you're the entrepreneur who founded 1A Auto Parts, which is an online parts and information supplier for the do-it-yourself auto cohort. And you just told me you have something like 7,000 videos on your website that teach people how to use the many, many different kinds of auto parts that you sell, from springs to struts.
That's correct.
And where did you get the idea to do this?
So it's a great story. Actually, it was my brother's idea. And he came to me back around 2010 and said, I have this idea. We're already selling auto parts, had been selling auto parts for about 10 years online. He said, I want to do these YouTube videos and show people how to install the parts we sell.
Sure.
And almost without thinking, I looked at him and I said, that'll never work.
Yeah.
It just won't work. But to my credit, I said, you know what, give it a shot. Go do a couple videos and let's see how it works. And I went back a week or two later after he'd done his first few videos, and I realized all the parts he had done a video for, and it was only 3 or 4, we'd sold out. Yeah. And so I called him back in. I said, hey, come sit down when you have a chance. He came back in. I said, how do we do 100 of these a month? And he just kind of looked at me and said, I thought you said that wouldn't work. But it's a funny story.
But it worked well, and you've been in business now 20 years?
Almost
20 years.
Yeah, almost 20 years.
And you really, I think are you the largest online auto parts, or
one of. We're the largest seller of auto parts on eBay. Literally since inception, we've been the largest online seller of parts on eBay. One of the largest online sellers. We compete against Amazon.com and folks like that.
Okay. So just curious, with a business like yours, what kind of an effect do the Trump administration's tariffs have on you?
Well, I like to tell folks I've been on the front lines of the undeclared trade war for almost the last 20 years. The reality is that we've had these trade agreements in place for a long time, but only one side is abiding by them, and that would be the United States. And I've watched, I've traveled overseas, I've dealt with different factories and suppliers overseas, and I've watched how they kind of proactively thwart these agreements that we have. So ultimately, I'm a free trade person. I don't think that the tariffs are a great long-term strategy, but I do think it's having a really good effect to let all of our trading partners know we're not going to be pushed around anymore, and that when it's a two-way agreement, both sides are going to have to abide by that. So I'm watching, as an interested party with who's impacted directly by these tariffs. But for the most part, I think it was a good kind of short-term thing to set people on notice.
So it's a burden you're willing to bear? Is that what you're?
Well, and the way the way supply chains work, because the lead times in the ocean, it takes so long. Really, there hasn't been an impact yet. It'll be 90 to 180 days before we really start to see an impact. Because most of what we have sitting on the shelf, actually, right now, everything we have sitting on the shelf is pre-tariff.
So you're, in reading about your biography and basically your political biography, you did some work for Scott Brown, or I guess you contributed to his campaign, also to Mitt Romney and Rand Paul, and you credit Scott Brown's campaign as sort of getting you interested in politics. Did you have no interest in politics before that?
Yeah, so first 10 years of my business, 24/7, all I did was run the business, and my entry into politics was really through the business and some of the interactions we had with government, generally the state government. The local folks were always very supportive in town in Pepperell, but some of our interactions were negative, and I found there really was no voice for small business. And Scott Brown's campaign was the first time we'd hired some management, so I had some other folks helping me run the company, so I had some free time. I was able to volunteer, knock doors for Scott, made phone calls, and also donated to his campaign. And that's when it's funny, earlier today, we were just in Littleton, but it's the intersection of 110 and 119 where Scott had an event almost a week out from his election in 2010 where it had just snowed, and the parking's, there's not a lot of parking, like parallel parking spots in downtown Littleton, and the snowbanks were covering it, and people were trying to park, but then they were in the road, and the road got stopped, and then more people were stopping, and more people were getting out of the car, and Scott, it got too big for the inside venue. He came outside, he got up on this snowbank, and I just kind of stepped back, and it was really almost surreal. And you had a sense at this point he could win it. And I remember thinking to myself, who are these folks, and these folks who agree with us on essentially fiscal responsibility and fiscal issues, and if he wins this thing, then I want to find out who these folks are and how do I get them to come out again and again. And that was really kind of, I guess, my awakening in politics.
Okay, so you're trying to defeat a Democrat in a district that has had fewer and fewer Republicans compared to Democrats over the years. It's in one of the bluest states in the country. No Republican has been in the House since, I think, 1994. Blute and Torkelson, I think, were the last. And it hasn't elected a Republican in the Senate since 1953, except for 2 years of Scott Brown. So what's your message to Democrats and, more importantly, independents for why they should vote for you, a Republican in a blue state?
Well, I think it's about time. I mean, you bring up independents or unenrolled. The fastest growing political party in Massachusetts actually is no party affiliation.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in our district it's close to 60% have no party affiliation whatsoever. And in that world environment, I don't feel like the labels matter. I'm a businessman. I look at this as a job interview. And the folks of the district are the hiring manager, and they need to understand that I'm the best person to do the job, to fix local issues, things like roads and bridges, address the opioid crisis, bring the government back to the people, impact them in their daily lives. And so my job is to prove to them that I'm the best person to represent them.
You mentioned, I think, in one of the biographies I read that you had two people who you sort of held up as people you aspired to. One was Paul Cellucci, another was Paul Tsongas. I also noticed that a third was somebody you contributed to, which is Rand Paul. So there's three Pauls there, and one's a moderate Democrat, one's a moderate Republican, one's a libertarian. How do you? That seems like a very diverse mix of people to aspire to their.
Sure, again, I think that speaks to the kind of the Yankee work ethic and ingenuity and keep the government on the libertarian side. The government, keep the government out of my home. The federal government especially has no business what private citizens are doing in their home. And then Paul Tsongas and Paul Cellucci, the two Pauls are both from the district. Mm-hmm. Paul Tsongas obviously from Lowell, Paul Cellucci from Hudson. Mm-hmm. Both were working class men of the people, mm-hmm. and that's that's what I aspire to. I'm running to represent the people, and the House of Representatives is supposed to be the branch of federal government that's closest to the people. And I want to bring it back to that. I think what you see down there now in D.C. it's really turned into a circus. And we've been at this for over a year now. And what I heard from early on is people they don't understand how the federal government impacts their daily lives anymore. And again, so my number one issue, or 1 and 2, is the opioid epidemic, and then roads and bridges. You look at Route 2. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're here in air today. Route 2 is a 2-lane or 4-lane, I guess, divided highway, but the exits and on-ramps were built in the Great Depression era. Every other spur that comes out of Boston, you got 128 and 495, but every other spur is a 6-lane divided modern highway. But Route 2 is still this antiquated highway. We have Devens, which is open for development, but we don't have modern infrastructure so that companies might want to, locate
mm-hmm.
manufacturing,
Sure.
distribution, other things like that. So again, it's bring it back to the people, and I think that's really what the people are looking for.
I'm going to come back to infrastructure in just a minute, but if you're elected, you would be the only Republican in the Democratic delegation. How will you deal with that? Will you be able to work across the aisle?
Well, you're absolutely right. But the way people need to look at it is the way D.C. works is it's a seniority system. I will be, on day one, the senior member of the majority party, okay? So as with Republicans in the majority, I'm the senior member. I will be the most influential member of the congressional delegation the moment I take the oath of office. And I tell people, very matter-of-factly, I will be the most effective congressman for the people of this district and the people of Massachusetts since Tip O'Neill.
So you have no truck with the Blue Wave.
Blue waves are for surfing.
I see. So you're not having any of that. All right. So let me ask you another question here. You're like a lot of business people going into politics. You're touting your business experience as being valuable in the public sector. This is true of a lot of business people. Certainly, the president stressed his business background, but he has kind of famously been challenged by his struggles to work with the legislature, the bureaucracy, the cabinet, and so forth. So, and this has happened to other business people as well. Mitt Romney, who came out of a political family, managed to negotiate the transition pretty successfully. What do you think in your background will enable you to go from being a CEO to somebody who has to deal with a lot of consensus and a lot of different arms and pieces of government.
Absolutely. But the fact is, I've already done it. So building a company from a small company to a medium company to a much larger company, I mean, that just happened. All along the way, there were larger companies who were trying to make sure that didn't happen. And so when I would negotiate with a supplier, they would have already heard from a larger company, don't deal with this person, you know, this person's bad for the market, all kinds of things. And so I had to go into each and every negotiation, and I have to understand, you don't get to pick the person on the other side, okay? But I had to understand what's in this person's interest, and how can I create win-win scenarios so that they will, you know, take a risk, because for them it was a risk. You know, they have their existing customer base, they don't need to deal with me. I'm the new guy in the block, the small guy, and you know, every single one of them, everyone who's done business with me has been successful. And that's because I found a way to figure out what would work for them, but was good for my company, was also good for their company. And Congress is no different. You get, whether I'm working with somebody from my party, the administration, congressional leadership, or the other party, I still have to understand, you know, what's in their interest, how do I find a way to help them and help myself? And the reality is, you can't get everything you want, and you have to understand that. But if you can both come out ahead in the end, then everyone's better off.
Okay. Let me mention something about the incumbent in the seat right now, Nikki Tsongas. The following was a comment about Nikki Tsongas by Republican Congressman Michael Turner of Ohio, who said, Nikki Tsongas has been willing to work with moderate Republicans on immigration reform, small business tax credits, and creating better educational and job opportunities for all citizens. Nikki Tsongas has worked above and below the radar for the benefit of her constituents. That was Michael Turner, Republican of Ohio. The question is that a sentiment that citizens in your district can count on should you become their representative in Congress?
Absolutely. Very much so. The fact is, again, I'm running, it's a job interview with the people of the district. My only goal is to represent them and the interests of the communities they love. I'm never going to be a lobbyist. You look at 75% of these folks, they leave Congress, you know, they go there middle class, upper middle class, they leave rich, they all become lobbyists. I already have the best job I ever had. I don't need it. I'll never be a lobbyist. Not going to do a book deal or do a reality TV show or take a pension. You know, I can't serve your interests and the interests of the community that you love if I'm busy trying to pad my own wallet.
So you come from Pepperell.
Yes.
You must have a pretty good idea what Ayer is like. What do you know about Ayer?
Well, we played Ayer in football and baseball, you know, when I was in high school.
That was back probably in the days when Devens was here.
Devens was still here. And I know that, you know, Ayer's, it's been hit hard. When you talk about when Pepperell lost the paper mill, it was the same kind of shot, just a much bigger blow when they closed Fort Devens. So I understand that. You know, I've been through Main Street in Ayer many times, and you see the closed businesses or the stores that are, you know, it's almost like a revolving door. And it's like that in a lot of the Merrimack Valley. The economy is doing very well right now, but there's still pockets, especially in our district. You talk about Ayer, but really this district, it's the New Hampshire border district. So from Haverhill to Gardner, there's almost a dozen towns on the New Hampshire border, and every single one of these, Pepperell being one of them, every single one of these towns, you're competing with our friendly neighbors to the north, and it's not easy. And so, but I know what that's like. I understand how to build a company in that environment and how to bring high-paying jobs into these towns, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Well, let me tell you why I asked specifically about Ayer, because there are at least three significant ways that Ayer and the surrounding communities rely on the federal government for support. One, of course, is the civilian turnover of Devens to local jurisdiction. And the communities in the area, you know, you've got Shirley, Harvard, Ayer, and Lancaster to some extent, are really relying on the federal government to continue to fund the cleanup of the remaining environmental contamination on the former military base. And of course, that has to continue, and it has been continuing, but it has to continue through shutdowns and budget crunches and so forth.
The federal government has to clean up their own mess.
Right.
Absolutely.
And it has to happen and has to continue to be funded. The second area where we rely on support is through what Congresswoman Tsongas has just done, which is the Wild and Scenic Environments Protection that she has just put in place for the Nashua River. The Nashua River goes through Lancaster, Harvard, all the way to Pepperell. And you know, for all the communities around here, the cleanup of that and the preservation of that as a resource are very important. The third is very specific to, well, it's not actually specific to Ayer. It has to happen in Ayer, but it affects all the, basically a lot of your district. And that's the infrastructure project, which is the Ayer commuter rail station. Mass transit here has needed parking for quite some time. We have an earmark that Congressman Tsongas was very instrumental in preserving, and we are now moving forward after quite a long ramp up. We're building a parking facility for commuters here in town. But support has to continue because we have a station that's quite old. We have infrastructure improvements that have to happen along with that. And again, on all three of those projects, Devon's, natural resources in terms of the Nashua Valley, and the mass transit parking and mass transit in general, can the residents of Ayer and the surrounding communities count on Rick Green's support in those three areas if he's elected to Congress?
Not only can they count on Rick Green, they need to know that I'm the best person for the job. So you may have seen my commercial where I
was going to bring that up.
When I jump into Merrimack River.
We have a picture of that that's on the screen right now. You can't see it, but
okay.
I guess what
you don't jump in a river unless you're serious about keeping our waterways clean. Let me just put it that way.
Rick Green jumps into the Merrimack River in street clothes and swims across. Now I have to say that I travel across the Rourke Bridge quite frequently, and you didn't need to do that to convince me that the Rourke Bridge is in drastic need of replacement. I mean, it's been there three decades.
Years,
3 decades, of course, and that's a big infrastructure project because you can't just fix the bridge because you start to feed the traffic across the river. You've got infrastructure issues on both sides of the river to handle all the traffic. It's only a 2-lane bridge, and so there's a lot to do there. But so that you mentioned that, you've also mentioned the Concord Circle.
Yep.
Yes, those are some interesting infrastructure projects. What else have you contemplated in terms of that in Concord Circle and Route 2? What other projects have you?
Well, I think the biggest infrastructure issue right now is what happened in Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover, where you had the gas explosions.
Sure. Yeah.
Don't talk about it much in my bio, but I've been running my company for the last 20 years, but before that, I actually built rockets. So I was a rocket scientist.
Right.
And so I have some experience with the pressure systems, and you can think about these gas lines as like a balloon. Think about all the seals and things in there as a balloon that's been blown up, and of course, you blow it up too much and it pops.
Sure.
And unfortunately, that's the tragedy of the explosions we had. But if it doesn't pop and then it goes back, that balloon it's all stretched out. It's not as good as it used to be. And the issue we have right now is they're going around there testing something like 8,600 homes and businesses and things like that. And some of them get replaced. A lot of them will test out okay. The issue you're going to have is that meter at the home might have a design life 20 or 30 years. Mm-hmm. And it tests out okay today, but now it's going to wear out much sooner. Mm-hmm. So my real concern is what's going to happen 2, 3, 4 years down the road. Are we going to have more gas leaks? Are we going to have fires, or heaven forbid, more explosions? And if I'm in Congress, there's not a bureaucrat down in D.C. who's going to be able to get something by me because I have the technical background to understand is the maintenance program and the inspection program and the routines they have in place, is that enough to make sure that our infrastructure is where it needs to be?
And as far as you're concerned, it's a federal issue?
It's a federal, state, local. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody's involved. Look, if the gas pipelines cross state lines, it's absolutely a federal issue.
Mm-hmm. Is it an issue that requires federal funding?
A lot of times I think we have to be careful. I mean, everybody wants, you talk about funding. A lot of these things can be solved without any additional money. We have to go look at the regulatory regimen and say, what were we watching? And we were probably watching 30 things, and none of them were the right things. Mm-hmm. So we're spending a ton of money on regulations, regulating things that aren't the real problem. We need to shift those resources and reprioritize to the things that either are more likely to happen, or if they do happen, even as unlikely as they may be, could result in catastrophic or life-threatening issues. And if we focus on those important things, there's plenty of money already out there. It's just a shifting of priorities.
Okay. What about committees? Congresswoman Tsongas served on the Armed Services Committee and 2 of the subcommittees of that, and also on Natural Resources and 2 subcommittees on that. Have you scoped out committees that you want to serve on?
Transportation and infrastructure. That's number 1, and then the other one is, I think, Energy and Commerce, which essentially is also infrastructure, the grid, power lines, gas lines, things like that.
Okay.
You know, the way the system works down there is folks want to get on Ways and Means, which is where all the money bills come from, or the Armed Services, because that's how you pad your resume with you know, foreign policy experience if you want to climb the ladder. I'm going down there to serve the people. When the people decide it's time for me to come home or I've had enough, I'm coming back. So the infrastructure committee, the committees I'm looking to get on, these are not what you would call prime committees, but that means I'm going to be able to get on them much easier, and I'm going to be able to do the work that really helps the people of the district, and that's why I'm focused there.
Okay, let's go to opioids. You've said this is a human tragedy. It's a priority for your campaign. A lot of people are talking about opioids and doing something about it. We just had federal legislation, I believe, that was just passed on opioids. The governor's been focused on it. How are you focused on it differently than, say, even in your competitor, your opponent is also focused on it? How are you different from the other things that are going on with opioids?
Yeah, so the one thing that I've said, I'll tell you how I'm different in a couple ways. First and foremost, as a businessman, it's a huge problem. Everyone talks about it as a big problem. And we heard it from day one on the campaign trail. So I went and I looked at all the members of our delegation. Not one of them has a member of their staff dedicated to this issue. So they're all talking about how it's a big issue, but no one has committed resources to it. Again, as a businessman, the first thing I do is I make someone responsible and then I hold them accountable. We've already announced a gentleman, Sal DeFranco, former Navy SEAL, lost his sister to the opioid epidemic. He's our point person on our Empowering Recovery Task Force. And I'm going to appoint a senior staff person on day one whose only job is going to be to deal with the opioid crisis. So to make sure, coordinating all the efforts that are all the resources available in DC, make sure those are available here in the district, make sure all the great work that's going on by different groups and nonprofits here in the district is being coordinated, so we're sharing the best practices and learnings. That's one way. Another way is folks talk about education. They talk about treatment. Both very important. A lot of things going on, federal, state, and local. What no one talks about is opiates as a business. It's a distribution business, an illegal business, but still a distribution business. Yeah. I created a distribution business competing against the likes of Amazon.com and other world-class competitors. I have unique insight into how to disrupt the supply chain of fentanyl. You talk about Lawrence as the hub, which it is, of opiate traffic in New England. You've got 495, 95, 93, all these major thoroughfares, and they're trying to put their distribution points. You couldn't run the opioid trade out of air, because everyone would be like, why is there 400 cars in and out of that house all day? But in a place like Lawrence, where it's more densely packed, you can have a couple different houses, a couple different waypoints, and the goal is they want to be as close to the distribution lanes and the highways as possible. But once you understand these things, it's not that difficult to disrupt it. And these are things that I'm the only one even talking about this. From my opponent to the rest of the congressional delegation, folks don't even understand the problem at this level, much less have a solution for it.
What about the pharmaceutical companies?
So you look at the pharmaceutical companies, so take our veterans, for instance. These folks are coming back with these catastrophic injuries that, quite honestly, 20 years ago they would have died from. The great news is, with advances in modern medical science, they're living. But they're dealing with these stresses that we haven't seen before, because they've survived injuries they wouldn't have survived before. And they're being prescribed opiates for the pain. Look, I think everybody understands that this is something that we have to look at. The pharmaceutical companies are already on notice. They know they've gone too far. Everything's on the table with these folks. I mean, if they knew how addictive these things were, then they're culpable. I mean, they need to be held accountable.
In what way?
I have to look at it.
Okay. Let me ask you.
If the law was broken to the maximum extent of the law, to be clear.
Yeah.
And if there's not a law and they didn't break a law, then we may need to look at.
Need a law.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay. You're running as a Republican in the era of Donald Trump. You voted for him, and I guess you've contributed to his campaign. Even from the beginning of the 2016 campaign, the president, according to a vast amount of reporting, often has the most tenuous hold on the truth. He insisted in the beginning that Central Park Five were guilty. They were exonerated in court, and people who committed the crime were confessed, and he still maintained that they were guilty. He said he was going to release his taxes. He didn't. There have been documented statements on 2 or 3 different websites by major news media. He has uttered as many as 5,000, probably more than 5,000 false or misleading statements. And just yesterday, the day before, he wrote an entire op-ed in which every single sentence was proven to be false or incorrect. How do you respond to that when you're running as a Republican? You know, what should people in your district think about the president and the fact that you've supported him? And I agree, you haven't said much about him on your website, and you haven't made a lot of public endorsements of the president, but you did vote for him, and you have supported his campaign.
Yeah, I think. Look,
I mean, it's a Democratic district.
Look, the governor carried the district by 10 points in 2014. He'll probably carry the district by 20 or more points.
Right.
So
he's been very outspoken against the president as well.
But I think the beauty of our system is, both our judicial system and our electoral system is, I stand on my own merits. The reality is, I can't control what the president does. I can't control what the governor does, and they're not on the ballot in this race. The voters have my opponent, and they have Rick Green. And I have my record, and I've shown I have a record of success and accomplishment, and I believe I am the best person to fix the roads and bridges, to address the opiate crisis, and I believe that's why they're going to vote for me, because I'm the best man for the job.
But do you think that kind of disingenuous and insincere behavior is conducive to good government?
Look, I think the voters will have a chance to decide on that in 2 years. And, the president has to stand on his record just as the governor does, just as anybody else, who's an incumbent coming up for election has to do. But I have to stand on my record. I can't run based on being the governor's person or the president's person. I have to be the people's person.
Okay. So, Paul Ryan, he's retiring in just a few months. Have you thought about who might be the person to replace him?
I haven't. I've got 3 weeks left, and the only race that I'm thinking about in this cycle, in this campaign, is mine.
Okay. In your campaign materials, we talked about this. You made much of the need for economic development and the ways you propose to address that. One of the things you mentioned is reducing regulation. To a lot of environmentalists, they hear anti-regulation as another term meaning, anti-regulation is also meaning anti-environmental protection. Again, Donald Trump has been one of the prime denialists in the country. There are many more in Congress. Just after I guess it was just this past week, there was this intergovernmental panel on climate change, comprised of 91 authors, 42,000 scientific commentators and assessments from 6,000 scientific studies, saying there is broad consensus that the further and the faster the Earth system is pushed towards warming, the greater the risk. They said, once we hit 2 degrees warming, the world will be a profoundly different place. There will be almost no coral reefs remaining. The Arctic will be completely devoid of ice during summer, at least once a decade, and huge numbers of animals and plants will become extinct as their habitat becomes smaller and smaller. Most Americans, majority of Americans, accept the scientific consensus on climate change and as it having human causation. NASA, where you once worked, considers human-caused climate change a major concern. The U.S. military in general, General Mattis specifically, accept the consensus. Do you accept the scientific consensus on climate change, being a human-caused?
Look, I think climate change is happening. It's always been happening. But what's really important is, what are you going to do about it? What are the policy prescriptions?
But you accept that it's human-caused.
Again, so what I said is, it's been happening forever. The science, we don't need to debate the science, okay? It's beyond debate. The fact is, climate change is happening. The real question is, what are you going to do to address it?
But the argument that is often advanced is the climate always changes and it isn't human-caused. But what's happening right now?
I guess my point is, this is the circus of D.C. Is it or isn't it? Is it or isn't it? It's not important, okay? The reality is, what are you going to do about it?
It's important whether it's human-caused. Do you accept that it's human-caused?
But why is that important?
Because if it's human-caused, we as humans can do something about it. And you just read the report. I mean, we're facing
If we can do something about it, even if it's not human-caused, we wouldn't.
What do you mean?
You're saying it's only if it's human-caused that we would do something about it. What I'm saying is we need to do something about it. Look, I'm not into the blame game. I'm not into
I guess what I would say is the president said yesterday, the climate's always changing and it'll get better.
I know, but let's talk
It'll
about
come
what
back.
do we do.
Do you believe that it's going to come back
But
just all
let's
by
talk about
itself?
what we do. Let's talk about actions. Okay, actions speak louder than words. All right. The reality is, what have I done? Okay, we talked about earlier jumping in the river. I care about our rivers. But if you look at my fulfillment center in Littleton, there's something close to 800,000 square feet of solar panels on the roof of that building where we located our business. All right. The reality is, a lot of people talk about this. It's all talk. It's all, pardon the pun, but it's a bunch of hot air. The reality is, myself, my company, we spoke with our own hard-earned money, and we got in that building. Okay. As a matter of fact, it's a preview. We've got an ad coming out. Our third television ad, our third campaign ad will be out shortly. Basically, we show the solar panel installation. What we can't have is another evergreen solar, where the government comes in, picks winners and losers, and we lose tens or hundreds of millions of dollars because the government has some great idea. These one-size-fits-all coming out of D.C., okay, that's what you wind up with when everybody's playing the blame game. I don't want to play the blame game. That to me, that's not interesting. What's interesting to me is how do we solve the problem? Where do we go from here?
How do we?
Exactly.
So what's your solution?
Again, I just talked about it. I mean, you've already got solar. You've got a lot of things happening. The free enterprise system, in many ways, is already overcoming this. The cost of solar is going down. The productivity of solar cells is going up. You have more and more solar installations. Given that the free enterprise system is basically already giving you a solution, we need to be very careful that government doesn't come in and mandate something that winds up making it much, much worse.
So you believe that the free enterprise system can resolve the problem of climate change?
Again, you're putting words in my mouth. I mean, I don't think that's a fair or accurate statement at all.
All right. Well, Rick, I see that we're running out of time here. I just have one other thing to say, and that is, you said, I think, in one of your interviews that they asked you what your favorite cup of coffee was, and you said your favorite cup of coffee was an ice cream cone from Kimball's. I think that's what you said.
Yeah, I don't drink coffee, so it was it's probably
So
making an offhand
I just
remark.
wanted to say, if you're elected, would you come back to Ayer and have a slice of pizza at the Neshoba restaurant, which is renowned to be some of the best pizza in all of Massachusetts?
I'll have it before the election.
Okay.
That's a promise.
Okay.
And then, of course, after the election, I'll be back as well.
All right, we'd like to come with you.
All
Rick
right.
Green, thanks so much
My pleasure.
for
Thank
being
you.
here with us on 20 Minutes.
I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.